Today's story is called The Faraway Train Whistle Mr. Ellis Heard. Welcome to Warm Life Stories. If you enjoy gentle stories like this, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments. Now, let's begin. It was a quiet morning. Not the kind that rushes you forward, but the kind that gently asks you to stay. The light came in slowly, resting on the porch like it had nowhere else to be. A pale gold glow touched the wooden floorboards, warming them just enough to take the chill away. Somewhere down the street, a sprinkler clicked on and off. A bird fluttered, then settled. Nothing important seemed to be happening. And somehow, that felt important. Mr. Ellis sat in his usual chair on the right side of the porch, the old one, with the armrest worn smooth by years of use. He held a chipped mug between both hands, letting the warmth seep into his fingers. Steam rose quietly, then disappeared into the morning air. He didn't rush the first sip. He never did. The neighborhood was still half asleep. Houses stood quietly, windows closed, curtains barely moving. A soft breeze passed through the maple tree in the yard, lifting a few leaves before letting them fall back into place. Mr. Ellis watched them for a moment. Then he looked down the street, the way he always did. That was when he heard it. At first, it was so faint he wondered if he imagined it. A long, distant sound, low and steady, not loud, not urgent. A train whistle, far away. It didn't belong to this street. There were no tracks nearby, no station, no reason for that sound to be here. And yet, it was. The whistle drifted through the air, carried gently by the breeze. It rose, then softened, stretching thin across the quiet morning like a memory trying not to interrupt. Mr. Ellis paused. His mug hovered just before his lips. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in confusion, but recognition. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply listened. The sound wasn't calling him anywhere. It wasn't asking him to follow. It just existed for a few seconds before fading back into the distance. But something about it stayed. Mr. Ellis lowered the mug and rested it carefully on the small table beside him. The table wobbled a little, as it always did. He steadied it with his hand, then leaned back in his chair. The porch creaked softly beneath his weight. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, just to sit inside the sound for a moment longer. The whistle was gone now, replaced by birds, by the breeze, by the quiet rhythm of an ordinary morning. Still, his chest felt different, not heavy, not sad, just touched, as if a door he hadn't opened in years had shifted slightly, not wide enough to walk through, only enough to let a little light in. Mr. Ellis opened his eyes again. The maple leaves were still moving. The light was still soft. The world hadn't changed. And yet, something had. He wrapped his hands back around the mug, feeling the warmth once more. The porch felt steady beneath him. The morning stretched on, unhurried. Far away, wherever that train was headed, it kept moving. And here, on this quiet porch, Mr. Ellis stayed right where he was, listening. Mr. Ellis had always believed that mornings said a lot about a person. Not the loud ones, not the rushed ones, but the quiet mornings, those were honest. Every day, he woke at nearly the same time. Not because an alarm told him to, but because his body remembered the rhythm. He moved slowly through the house, careful not to rush a single step. The floorboards knew his weight. They creaked softly, the way old friends do when they recognize you. In the kitchen, he filled the kettle by hand. No hurry, no need for anything fancy. The kettle whistled gently, nothing like the train he'd heard earlier. This sound belonged here. It always had. He reached into the cupboard and took down the mug, the chipped one, the one Maggie used to reach for without thinking. He ran his thumb along the crack near the handle, just once. A habit he didn't remember starting, only that he never stopped. Mornings had changed after Maggie passed, but not all at once. At first, he tried to keep everything exactly the same. Same chair, same mug, same quiet routines. Later, he learned that sameness didn't stop the ache, but it softened it. After breakfast, Mr. Ellis stepped back onto the porch. The air felt a little warmer now. The sun had climbed higher, brushing the yard with light. He sat again, right where he always did. From here, he could see the whole street, the Harrison's house with the blue door, the mailbox that leaned slightly to the left, the sidewalk where children used to race their bikes years ago. Most days, he didn't think much about any of it. It was just the view. But this morning, the view seemed to linger. A cat Toby appeared near the steps, stretching lazily before settling down. Mr. Ellis noticed, as he always did. He nodded once, a quiet greeting. He never called Toby over. Some things worked better when you let them choose you. Across the street, a curtain shifted. Someone was awake. Someone else was starting their day. Mr. Ellis rested his hands on his knees and breathed in. Fresh air, cut grass from somewhere nearby, a hint of coffee drifting through an open window. He had lived on this street for decades, long enough to see seasons repeat themselves, long enough to watch people come and go. What stayed were the small things, the sound of mail sliding into a slot, a neighbor's wave, a familiar silence that didn't feel empty. He adjusted his glasses and leaned back slightly. The chair creaked again. Life, he had learned, didn't need to be loud to be full. Some mornings were meant only to be noticed, not fixed, not filled, just noticed. And as Mr. Ellis sat there, in his chair, on his porch, with the day slowly unfolding, he understood something simple. These ordinary mornings, they weren't waiting to be replaced. They were enough. The sound was gone now. The morning had moved on. And yet, something inside Mr. Ellis had shifted. He sat very still on the porch, hands resting loosely in his lap. The air felt the same. The street looked the same. But the quiet carried an echo. He hadn't thought about trains in a long time. Not really. They were just part of the background once. Something you heard and didn't question. Until one day, you did. Mr. Ellis looked down the street again, though he knew there was nothing to see. No tracks. No crossing gates. Just the familiar curve of pavement disappearing behind the houses. Still, his mind had already begun to travel. Not far. Not fast. Just enough. He remembered a smaller town. A simpler station with peeling paint and a bench that rocked slightly when you leaned back. He could almost feel the rough wood beneath his hands. Back then, trains meant movement. Possibility. He had been younger, thinner, always a little unsure of where he was headed, but certain he didn't want to stay still. And Maggie loved the trains. Not for where they went, but for how they sounded. She used to stop whatever she was doing when the whistle blew. Cooking, folding laundry, even talking. She would tilt her head, just slightly, and smile. Listen, she'd say, as if the sound itself were telling a story. Sometimes they stood near the tracks together, far enough back to feel safe, close enough to feel the ground tremble when the train passed. Maggie would reach for his hand without looking. Always his left hand. Always warm. He remembered how she squeezed once, just once, as the cars rushed by. No words. None were needed. Those memories didn't arrive all at once. They never did anymore. They came the way old photographs do, one corner at a time. The smell of oil and metal in the air. The wind lifting Maggie's hair as the train sped past. The way her laugh sounded afterward, light and unguarded. Mr. Ellis swallowed quietly. He hadn't realized how long it had been since he'd let himself stay there. In that time, in that place, after Maggie passed, he tried not to linger on memories like that. Not because they hurt too much, but because they felt too complete, like chapters already finished. Life had asked him to keep turning pages, even when part of him wanted to reread the old ones. The whistle this morning hadn't asked permission. It had simply arrived. And now, sitting on the porch, Mr. Ellis understood why it felt different. That sound hadn't pulled him backward. It had reminded him that some moments never really leave. They settle quietly inside you, waiting. He opened his eyes fully and looked at the empty chair beside him. The one Maggie used to claim every morning. Sunlight rested across the seat, soft and patient. Mr. Ellis reached out and brushed his fingers along the armrest. Just a touch. Just enough. The memory eased, not fading, but finding its place again. The street remained quiet. The day continued to unfold, and somewhere far away, a train kept moving forward. carrying with it a sound that had traveled all the way back to him, not to take him anywhere, just to remind him where he had been. Mr. Ellis stayed on the porch long after the memory settled. The chair beside him remained empty. The sunlight shifted slowly, inch by inch, across the wooden boards. There were things in his life that had never needed words. And then, there were things that had waited too long for them. Mr. Ellis had never been a man of big speeches. He didn't believe important feelings needed announcing. He showed up. He fixed things. He stayed. For most of his life, that had felt like enough. When Maggie was alive, they rarely talked about feelings the way younger people do now. They talked about groceries, about the weather, about whether the roses needed more water. Love lived in the spaces between. Still, there were moments, he remembered now, quiet moments, when he had thought about saying something more. Nothing dramatic, just a sentence or two. Like the morning Maggie stood in the kitchen, humming softly while she washed dishes. He remembered watching her from the doorway, thinking how lucky he was. He had almost said it then. Almost. But the kettle was boiling. Or the phone rang. Or the moment simply passed. Life had a way of doing that. Mr. Ellis didn't regret those silences in the way people imagine regret. They weren't sharp. They didn't keep him awake at night. They were softer than that. They showed up in moments like this. Unexpected, quiet, impossible to rush away. He looked down at his hands. Old hands now. Veins visible, knuckles worn from years of work. These hands had built shelves, fixed doors, planted gardens. They had held Maggie's hand across busy streets. They had rested on her back as they danced slowly in the living room, long after the music ended. And yet, they had never held certain words. Mr. Ellis leaned forward slightly and rested his elbows on his knees. The porch creaked again, adjusting to him. There were other unsaid things too. Conversations he'd put off. Calls he meant to make someday. He told himself there would be time. There usually was. Until there wasn't. The morning air felt warmer now, heavier with late sunlight. A car passed at the end of the street. Someone laughed somewhere nearby. Life, it seemed, was still happening all around him. Mr. Ellis breathed in slowly, then out. He realized something then, not with sadness, but with clarity. The things he hadn't said weren't lost. They weren't trapped in the past. They had shaped the way he lived, the way he stayed, the way he noticed small things. Maybe words weren't the only way love spoke. Maybe love had been there all along. In the repaired hinges, the watered roses, the empty chair kept just as it was. Mr. Ellis leaned back and let his shoulders relax. The thought didn't erase the ache, but it softened it. The porch felt steady beneath him. The day felt open. He glanced once more at the chair beside him. Then he nodded, just slightly. Some things, he understood now, didn't need to be said out loud, to be heard. The porch had grown warmer by late morning. Sunlight no longer lingered, it settled. Mr. Ellis noticed it on his hands first. The light rested there quietly, filling the lines in his skin as if it had known them for years. He sat without moving, letting the moment stretch. There was no reason to hurry it along. A breeze passed through the yard, lifting the leaves of the maple tree just enough to make them whisper. Somewhere nearby, a screen door opened, then closed. Ordinary sounds, familiar ones. Mr. Ellis reached for his mug again. The coffee had cooled, but he drank it anyway. He had never minded that. As he set the mug down, his eyes drifted almost without thinking to the small table beside him. The drawer beneath it was slightly open. He paused. It had been that way for days, maybe longer. Inside were things he didn't use often, things he didn't throw away either. Mr. Ellis leaned forward and pulled the drawer open the rest of the way. It moved stiffly, as if surprised to be needed. Inside lay a few folded papers, a pair of reading glasses he hadn't worn in years, and a thin envelope, yellowed at the edges. He recognized it at once. Maggie's handwriting was still there. Soft, careful, a little uneven near the end. He didn't pick it up right away. Instead, he rested his hand on the edge of the drawer and took a slow breath. The kind that settles deep in the chest. This wasn't a discovery. He had known the envelope was there. What was different was that he wasn't turning away. Mr. Ellis lifted the envelope gently, as though it might crumble if he didn't. It felt lighter than he remembered. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded once. He unfolded it. The message was short, not meant to last this long. A note Maggie had written years ago, meant for a grocery bag, or a reminder on the counter. Don't forget to rest today. You always forget. He read it once, then again. A small smile touched the corner of his mouth before he realized it was there. She had known him well. Mr. Ellis sat back in his chair, the note resting in his open palm. He didn't feel a rush of emotion. No wave, no sting. Just a quiet warmth. Steady, familiar. He folded the paper carefully and placed it back into the envelope. Then, instead of returning it to the drawer, he set it on the table beside his mug. Not hidden, not displayed, just present. The breeze returned, softer this time. It brushed against his sleeve, then moved on. Mr. Ellis leaned back and closed his eyes, not to escape the moment, but to stay with it. For years, he had believed that holding on meant keeping things tucked away, safe, untouched. But sitting there, with the light on his hands and Maggie's note nearby, he realized something gentle. Letting something be seen didn't make it hurt more. It made it breathe. Mr. Ellis opened his eyes again. The porch looked the same. The street was still quiet, yet the space around him felt softer. He reached out and straightened the empty chair beside him, just a little. Then he settled back into his own seat and rested his hands on his knees. For the first time that morning, he felt fully present, not pulled by the past, not waiting on the future, just here. And that small shift, barely noticeable to anyone else, made all the difference. The afternoon arrived without ceremony. No sharp change. No announcement. It simply settled in, the way light does when it knows it's welcome. Mr. Ellis remained on the porch longer than usual. Not because he was lost in thought, but because he felt no need to leave it. The note lay quietly on the small table beside his mug. He didn't look at it again. He didn't need to. Its presence was enough. Across the yard, the roses caught the sun. The petals glowed softly, just beginning to open. Maggie had always loved this hour of the day, the moment when color felt warmer than light. Mr. Ellis rose slowly and walked toward them. His steps were careful, familiar. The ground knew him, as well as the porch did. He picked up the watering can and tilted it gently. Water flowed in a steady stream, darkening the soil. He watched it soak in, patient and quiet. For years, this small task had felt like a duty, something to be done. Today, it felt different. As he moved from one plant to the next, he found himself humming. Not loudly, not intentionally, just a few notes. It took him a moment to realize the tune was Maggie's, one she used to hum without realizing it herself. He didn't stop. The sound blended with the rustle of leaves and the distant noise of the street. Nothing stood out. Everything belonged. When he finished, Mr. Ellis set the watering can aside and stood there for a moment, hands resting at his sides. The sun warmed his back. A breeze passed, carrying the faint scent of flowers. He felt it then. Not sadness, not longing, gratitude. It surprised him with its steadiness. He had spent so long measuring his days by what was missing, by the empty chair, by the quiet evenings. But standing there, he saw something else. A life still unfolding. Slowly, gently, he returned to the porch and sat down again. This time, he shifted his chair slightly, not away from the empty one, but closer. The space between them felt less sharp now. Mr. Ellis rested his hands on his thighs and looked out at the street. A child passed on a bicycle, wobbling slightly before finding balance. An older neighbor waved from across the road. Mr. Ellis raised his hand in return. The gesture felt easy. The day moved on. Shadows lengthened. The light softened. Nothing remarkable had happened. And yet, everything felt touched by something quiet and kind. Mr. Ellis leaned back and exhaled slowly. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't carrying the day. The day was carrying him. By late afternoon, the street had found its rhythm again. Cars passed now and then. A door closed somewhere down the block. Life continued quietly, Without asking for attention, Mr. Ellis returned to the porch once more. Not out of habit this time, but out of comfort. He settled into his chair, adjusting it slightly until it felt just right. The small table stood beside him, steady now. The mug was empty. The note lay folded where he had left it. He didn't reach for it. Some things, he was learning, didn't need repeating. The air had changed. Cooler, softer. The kind of air that reminds you the day is easing toward evening. Mr. Ellis listened, not for anything in particular, just the way one listens when there's nothing to fix. A breeze moved through the maple tree, carrying the faintest rustle of leaves. Birds settled into quieter patterns. The neighborhood seemed to exhale. And then, almost without warning, a sound brushed the edge of his awareness. Not loud, not clear, but familiar. A train whistle. Much farther away this time, so distant it might have been imagined. Mr. Ellis didn't move. He didn't close his eyes. He didn't search for the source. He simply let the sound pass through him. It didn't pull him backward now. It didn't stir memories that needed tending. It felt different, like a reminder that some things continue on their own, steady, faithful, unchanged by distance. The whistle faded quickly, absorbed by the evening air. Mr. Ellis remained. He noticed how the sound left no ache behind, no tightness, only a quiet understanding. The sound hadn't come to take something from him. It had come to stay, not as noise, but as presence. He glanced toward the empty chair beside him. The light touched it gently, just before slipping away. "Good evening," he said softly. Not to anyone in particular. The words felt natural. As the sun lowered, shadows stretched across the porch. The wooden boards cooled beneath his feet. Mr. Ellis stood and straightened the chairs. Both of them. Inside, the house waited familiar and calm. He carried the note with him, not as something fragile, but as something settled. Before stepping inside, he paused once more at the doorway and looked back. The porch, the street, the quiet, everything was still there. Some sounds traveled far, others stayed close, and some, like that distant whistle, found a way to do both. Mr. Ellis closed the door gently behind him. The evening unfolded, and the day, at last, came to rest. As night settled in, the house grew still, not empty, just calm. Mr. Ellis moved through the rooms without turning on many lights. He had never liked brightness at this hour. Soft shadows felt more honest. He set the mug in the sink, folded the note once more and placed it in the drawer. Not hidden, just returned. The house breathed with him. He paused near the window and looked out at the street one last time. A porch light flicked on across the way. Somewhere, a television murmured quietly behind closed curtains. Life continued. Not loudly, but faithfully. Mr. Ellis stood there for a moment, hands resting at his sides, and thought about the day. Nothing remarkable had happened. No news. No visitors. No big decisions. Just a sound. A memory. A small shift of the heart. And yet, the day felt complete. He realized then that life didn't always move forward in large steps. Sometimes, it moved the way sound does, traveling slowly, carried by air, arriving when the world is quiet enough to listen. The train whistle had not asked him to follow. It hadn't pulled him backward either. It had simply reminded him that some moments echo longer than we expect, not because they are loud, but because they are true. Mr. Ellis turned away from the window and made his way toward the bedroom. The hallway light cast a warm glow along the walls, touching framed photographs as he passed. He didn't stop to look at them tonight. They didn't need his attention. They had already lived their lives. Before turning out the light, he sat on the edge of the bed and rested his hands on his knees. A familiar posture, a familiar peace. He thought about all the quiet sounds that had shaped his life. Footsteps in the early morning, the hum of a kettle, Maggie's voice, low and steady, and now, a whistle in the distance. He understood something simple then. We don't always carry the past with us in our thoughts. Sometimes, we carry it in sounds, in light, in the way certain moments slow us down. And maybe that's enough. Mr. Ellis lay down and pulled the blanket up gently. The house settled. The night held. Somewhere far away, a train moved on. Not toward him, not away from him, just moving. And here, in this quiet room, a man who had lived a long life closed his eyes, not with longing, not with regret, but with a soft understanding that the smallest sounds can remind us we have been loved, we have lived, and we are still here. Thank you for sitting with this story. May your days be gentle, and may you always find meaning in the quiet moments that choose to stay.